My father laughed, that loud, gut-deep kind of laugh that fills a room and dares anyone to challenge it. He was holding my son's report card in one hand, tapping the column of B's with his finger, like he'd just uncovered some great family joke. "Just like his mom," he said, grinning at me across the table. "Full of B's." And just like that, everyone laughed. It's strange how moments like that can feel both familiar and completely foreign at the same time. My name is Olivia Hale. I'm a mother, a daughter, and a high school teacher, and I've spent most of my life doing two things: loving my family and silently bracing myself every time my father opened his mouth. That day started like any other Sunday. We were at my father's place in Charleston, South Carolina. The same worn wooden table, the same old football memorabilia on the walls, the same smell of overcooked ribs and lemon-scented furniture polish. It felt like routine, until it didn't. Let me paint the scene for you. My son Micah sat next to me, clutching his folder like it was some kind of golden ticket. He's 11. Quiet. The kind of boy who thinks before he speaks, listens when most people don't. His teachers call him reflective. I call him my mirror. He sees everything, even the things I wish he wouldn't. Across from us sat Vernon Hale, my father, a man who believes in firm handshakes, good grades, and saying what you mean, even if it stings. He grew up in a different world, one where emotions were a luxury and women were expected to be sweet or smart. Barely both. I've heard him say I was bright, but I've never once heard him say he was proud of me. Not even when I graduated college with honors. Not even when I became the youngest head of my department. Not even when I became a mom. Still, I bring Micah over every Sunday. I tell myself it's for the family, for the tradition. But really, it's for Micah. I want him to know where he comes from, even if parts of that legacy still hurt. Micah had worked hard that semester. He studied late, joined the math club, even pulled his B in science up from a C. He wanted to show his grandfather what he'd done. He'd printed his report card double-sided and slid it carefully into his folder the night before. I remember him asking, "Do you think Grandpa will be proud?" And I remember not knowing what to say. So when he handed Vernon the paper at the table, I held my breath. Vernon adjusted his glasses, scanned the sheet, and broke into a smile. B in English, B+ in math, just like his mom, full of B's. His voice rang with amusement, a jab disguised as praise, the kind he's always given me. And everyone, my Uncle Ray, my sister Eliza, even my dad's longtime friend Gerald, laughed along. It was harmless, a joke, a family tease, except it wasn't harmless. And Micah knew it. I looked at him. He wasn't laughing, he wasn't angry either, just steady, focused. Then he reached into his folder again, another sheet of paper. This one wasn't a school printout. It had Micah's handwriting on it, carefully written, folded in thirds. He stood up, walked over to Vernon, and handed it to him. "This one's for you, Grandpa," he said. His voice didn't waver. "Mom said it's time you learned something too." The room froze. You could hear the old wall clock ticking behind us. Tick, tick, tick. Vernon looked down at the paper like it might explode. And in that moment, every single person at that table knew this wasn't part of the Sunday routine. This was something else. And none of us, especially not my father, were ready for what was written on that second sheet. People always say, family is everything. And maybe that's true. But for me, family has always been complicated. My name is Olivia Hale, and for as long as I can remember, I've been trying to earn my father's approval, not in the desperate, dramatic way you see in movies. No, we Hales are quiet about our disappointments. We fold them up like old receipts and shove them into the back of a drawer, pretending they don't exist. But they're still there. Growing up, my father, Vernon, believed in results. Report cards, trophies, numbers. He was the kind of dad who didn't believe in trying your best if it didn't come with an award. He loved me, I know that, but he didn't always know how to show it. Or maybe he did, and he just chose not to. He used to tell people, "Olivia's a solid B student, reliable, consistent." I used to wonder if he even knew how hard I worked just to stay afloat. I had dreams. I had ambition. But I also had a voice in my head that sounded an awful lot like his, telling me I wasn't quite enough. And then there was my mom, Ella. She was the soft one, the one who sat with me when I cried over a test, who left notes in my lunchbox, who always whispered, "You're enough." I lost her to breast cancer when I was 23. It broke something in me. Not just grief, but the last buffer between me and the hardness my father carried around like armor. So I moved out, built a life, built distance. I became a high school teacher. Ironic, I know, considering the very thing I grew up dreading was someone grading me. But teaching gave me purpose. It helped me pour into kids the kind of support I never had. And then, 10 years ago, I had Micah. Micah changed everything. He was small, thoughtful, always watching. He picked up on tone, on silences. And even as a toddler, he knew when something wasn't right. Like when my dad would visit and make his usual comments, harmless on the surface, but always laced with comparison. That's how your mom was. Never first, but never last. Your mom. She was good at staying in her lane. Or his favorite. You get your grades from her side of the family. Micah didn't laugh. He listened. And I knew, even before he had the words, that he was filing it all away. Still, we went to see Vernon every Sunday. It was tradition. Fried chicken, lemon cake, folding chairs in the backyard when the weather was nice. Sometimes my sister Eliza would show up late with a new boyfriend. My Uncle Ray always brought a six-pack and fell asleep in front of the TV by 3 p.m. It was routine, predictable, familiar, but routine doesn't always mean safe. That Sunday morning, Micah was unusually quiet. He'd printed out his report card on our home printer, checked the ink, and slid it carefully into his blue folder. I was grading essays in the kitchen when he came in and said, "Do you think Grandpa will like it?" I smiled. "Of course he will. You worked hard. He'll be proud." It was a lie I told because it's what I wished someone had told me at his age. Micah paused, then asked, "Did he say he was proud of you when you were my age?" I froze. "What do you say to that?" "He showed it in his own way," I replied, and then, softer, "But I think I stopped needing him to say it a long time ago." Micah didn't say anything. He just nodded and went back to his folder. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that Micah had put a second sheet in that folder. Not a backup report card, not a drawing, something else entirely, something he'd made on his own. Micah was watching me, not just how I handled my father, but how I carried myself. He saw the strained smiles, the quiet silences, the way I never pushed back. And that Sunday, he decided to say the things I never had the courage to say. He decided to hand my father a different kind of grade, one that couldn't be laughed off. And while I thought we were just going to another Sunday lunch, Micah was walking into that house with a mission. He wasn't just bringing his report card, he was bringing mine too. By the time we arrived at my father's house that Sunday, everything felt perfectly ordinary, right down to the sound of the old screen door slamming behind us. Micah walked in with that blue folder clutched tight to his chest. I didn't think much of it. He was always careful with his schoolwork, but there was a certain focus in his eyes that I missed that morning. A steadiness. Like he'd already decided how the day was going to go, and the rest of us were just waiting to catch up. My father, Vernon, greeted us the same way he always did, with a gruff, "About time," and a one-armed hug that somehow managed to feel both welcoming and obligatory. He never hugged Micah, just tousled his hair like a coach might do to a second-string player who managed not to mess up. The table was already set. Fried chicken, over-salted green beans, and sweet tea so sugary it could pull a tooth. My Uncle Ray was at the far end, already on his second beer. Eliza wasn't coming that day. She texted saying her latest friend had invited her to a beach picnic. Classic Eliza, dodging discomfort with romance. I sat across from my father, Micah to my right. We passed the plates, exchanged small talk. And then, when the moment came, Micah looked up at me and whispered, "Now?" I blinked. "Sure," I said, thinking he meant showing off his grades. He stood, reached into the folder, and pulled out the first sheet, his official school report card. He handed it to Vernon with a straight face. My father adjusted his glasses and leaned in. "Let's see what we've got here," he muttered, scanning the page. B in English, B+ in math, a minus in social studies, science, B again. He glanced up at Micah with that familiar smirk. Well, just like your mom, full of B's. And there it was. That line, that joke, that stupid, tired jab that always found a way into every conversation about my achievements. like some kind of generational echo that refused to die. Everyone at the table laughed. Uncle Ray let out a snort. Even Gerald, Dad's fishing buddy, chuckled like it was the wittiest thing he'd heard all week. I forced a smile. I always did. It was easier than explaining why it stung. But I caught Micah out of the corner of my eye. He didn't smile. He didn't flinch. He just waited, like he'd expected this exact reaction. And then, without a word, he pulled a second sheet of paper from his folder. It wasn't a printout this time. It was a handwritten sheet folded neatly in thirds like a letter. He walked it over to my father, held it out, and said, "This one's for you, Grandpa. Mom said it's time you learned something too." The room went silent. I looked at Micah, trying to understand what he was doing. I hadn't told him to say that. I hadn't even seen the paper. But he wasn't nervous. He wasn't joking. He was steady, calm. Like he had practiced this moment in his head 100 times. My father slowly unfolded the sheet. His fingers trembled slightly, but he played it off by clearing his throat. I could see the header Micah had written at the top, bold letters in pencil. Grandpa's report card, Mantiti by Micah Hale. I froze. This wasn't a prank. Micah had graded my father, for real. He had drawn little boxes, each with a subject label and a grade. Emotional support, respect, kindness, listening, encouragement, and next to most of them, C's and D's. Under emotional support, Micah had written in tiny, neat letters, "You're good at telling people when they mess up, but not when they do something right. Mom says you've never told her she made you proud. I think she should have gotten an A." I stared at the table, then at my father. His face had changed, not angry, just still, like someone had thrown a bucket of cold water over him. "Micah," I started to say, unsure if I should stop him or thank him. But Micah turned to him again and said softly, "You always look at our grades. I thought maybe you'd want to see yours." He sat back down, folded his hands in his lap, and waited. No one spoke. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the quiet. I could feel the air change, like a storm moving through the room without a sound. It wasn't just tension, it was reckoning. For the first time in my life, my father had nothing to say, and that silence? That was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. The silence that followed Micah's words sat heavy around the table, like a thick fog no one wanted to move through. My father hadn't said a word. He just stared at the paper, his mouth slightly open, as if it would help him find something to say. But the words weren't coming. Not for him, and not for me. And that terrified me more than if he'd just gotten angry. Micah sat perfectly still, not smug, not even nervous, just present. He had done what he came to do, and part of me wanted to reach over and hug him, to tell him how brave he was. But another part, the part conditioned by decades of keeping things calm, respectful, proper, wanted to scold him for it, to protect the peace, even if that peace had been costing me my voice for years. That's when I realized he wasn't just trying to teach my father something. He was showing me something too. A few hours earlier, before we left the house, we had one of those rare, quiet conversations. I was folding laundry in the living room, and Micah was on the floor drawing, humming to himself. "Mom," he said without looking up. "Yeah, baby? Why does Grandpa always joke about you being a B student?" I hesitated. I didn't want to lie, but I didn't want to spill my childhood baggage all over him either. He likes teasing. That's just his way of talking. Micah paused his coloring. "But it doesn't make you smile." That stopped me. I looked at him. His eyes were serious in that way that makes you forget he's only 11. "It didn't make me smile when I was younger either," I admitted. "It made me feel small, like no matter what I did, it wasn't really good enough for him." "Did you ever tell him that?" I shook my head. I don't think he would have heard it, and after a while, I guess I just stopped needing him to say it. Micah didn't say anything right away, but a few minutes later he whispered, "You shouldn't have to stop needing that." I didn't respond. I just folded the last shirt and quietly left the room. So when he handed that paper to my father, it wasn't just about grades. It was a response. Not only to years of jokes, but to years of silence. He saw the pattern I'd accepted and made a choice I hadn't been able to. He spoke up. And now, In the stillness of my father's dining room, I realized something else. I had a choice too. I could let that moment pass, let my father fold the paper up, pretend it never happened, make another joke next Sunday, and keep the tradition of silent women and indifferent men alive. Or I could do something different. I took a deep breath. "Dad," I said quietly. His eyes flicked to mine, still unsure, still stunned. That look on his face. It wasn't defiance. It was something closer to shame. "I didn't know Micah had made that paper," I said, "but I need you to know he's not wrong." He didn't interrupt. That alone felt like a miracle. "I've spent most of my life working hard, being responsible, making you proud in ways you never said out loud. And somewhere along the way, I convinced myself it was fine, that I didn't need to hear it from you. But it still hurt. It still matters. And I think I'm tired of pretending it doesn't." My voice shook slightly, but I didn't stop. "You don't have to agree with how Micah did it, but you raised me to be honest, and he's just doing what you taught me to do. He's telling the truth." My father looked back down at the sheet. His fingers traced one of the comments Micah had written under respect. "You laugh when Mom does something okay, but you never say when she does something amazing. That's not fair." I watched something shift in him, not defensiveness, not outrage, just reflection. He cleared his throat. I didn't know he noticed all that. "He notices everything," I said. "He's your grandson. And he's watching you." That part I didn't say out loud. I didn't need to. My father folded the paper carefully, like it meant something now. He placed it beside his plate, untouched by food or drink, like he was afraid to damage it. "I'll think about it," he finally said. "That's all I can promise." And somehow, that was more than I'd ever gotten. It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't redemption. But it was movement. Micah looked at me, and I smiled at him, fully, proudly, for the first time that day. He'd cracked something open, and now I had to decide what I'd do with it. I never expected my father to cry. Not the man who stayed dry-eyed at my mother's funeral. Not the man who never missed a mortgage payment but forgot every birthday past my 10th. Not the man who believed emotion was something to be managed, not expressed. But as he sat there, in that stiff dining room chair, holding a sheet of paper written by an 11-year-old, I saw something shift behind his eyes. It wasn't a tear, not yet, but it was close. And for Vernon Hale, that was seismic. Micah stayed silent, letting the room breathe. He wasn't looking for applause. He wasn't trying to shame anyone. He had done what he felt was right, and that was enough for him. But for me, this moment was monumental. For years, I had waited for my father to see me, not as a checklist of achievements, not as a girl who turned out okay, but as a whole, complicated woman who fought hard for the life she built, as someone who carried pain he never acknowledged, and love he never returned in words. And somehow, it took Micah to finally shine a light on what had been sitting in the dark all along. My father finally spoke. His voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "I didn't know you felt that way," he said, looking at me but glancing back at Micah's report card like it had more answers than he did. "I know," I said. "That's part of the problem." He leaned back in his chair and rubbed the side of his face. The gesture made him look older, like the weight of his silence was catching up to him all at once. "I used to think," he said slowly, "that saying too much made you weak. That if I praised you too often, you'd stop trying. I thought I was helping." His voice cracked slightly, and I saw his hands tremble. "I didn't realize I was hurting you instead." There it was. Not an apology dressed up in excuses. A confession. Micah looked over at me, eyes wide, like he wasn't sure what was supposed to happen next. And honestly, neither was I. I stood up, walked around the table, and sat beside my father. "I wasn't perfect, Dad. I made mistakes. But I kept going. I raised Micah. I built a life from nothing. And not once did I stop wanting to hear that I did okay by you." He turned toward me slowly. His mouth moved before sound came out. "You did better than okay," he said. "You did everything I couldn't. And you did it without ever hearing what you needed." I felt it then. That old aching wound finally breathed for the first time in years. He wasn't just seeing me, he was finally saying it. A long pause followed, and then, almost imperceptibly, he reached out and placed his hand on top of mine. "I'm proud of you, Olivia." The words landed like bricks and feathers all at once, heavy with meaning, light with release. I didn't cry right away. My whole body went still, like it was trying to process the reality of hearing those words from a man I'd long since stopped waiting on. I squeezed his hand gently. "Thank you." Across the table, Micah smiled, just a little. The kind of smile that says, "Yeah, this is what I hoped would happen." My father looked at him next. "You're a brave kid," he said. "Smarter than I was at your age. Maybe smarter than I am now." Micah tilted his head. "I just wanted you to know how it feels." "You did," Dad replied, loud and clear. He picked up the handwritten sheet again and held it carefully, as if afraid it might tear. Then he looked at me. "Would it be okay if I kept this?" I nodded. "Of course." He folded it, once, twice, and slid it into the breast pocket of his shirt, right over his heart. And for the first time in my life, I believed it wasn't for show. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic hug, just a quiet understanding that something had changed, that the chain had been broken, that maybe, just maybe, the next Sunday lunch would be different. Because one brave boy decided to hand out a report card and made his entire family finally stop and learn something. The following Sunday, something happened that hadn't happened in years. My father opened the door before we could even knock. No gruff welcome, no sarcastic one-liner, just a quiet smile and a soft, "Glad you're here." And for Vernon Hale, that might as well have been a love letter. Micah and I walked inside. The table was already set, just like always, but something felt different. Lighter, less rehearsed. No one rushed to fill the silence with noise. No one ducked behind old jokes or tired jabs. For the first time, it felt like a place we wanted to be, not one we showed up to out of duty. Micah hung back for a moment, waiting for the usual hair tousle, but this time my father put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Heard you aced your science quiz this week." Micah looked up at me, surprised. I hadn't told him, but clearly someone had made a phone call. "You talked to Mom's school?" Micah asked, eyes wide. "I did," Vernon said. "Figured it was time I started paying attention." Micah nodded slowly, like he was still processing it, then walked into the kitchen like nothing had happened. But I saw it, the slight lift in his shoulders, the way his steps seemed a little more certain. I stayed back in the foyer for a minute, watching them, and that's when I realized it wasn't about the report card anymore. It was about the ripple it had created. A boy saw something broken and decided not to walk past it, and somehow that courage healed more than just me. My father didn't become a new man overnight. He still mispronounced TikTok, still refused to call tofu real food. But he listened more. He asked questions. He even started telling me stories from his own childhood, things I'd never heard, like how his own father never once said he was proud and how he swore he'd be tougher so his kids would be stronger. I used to think his silence was cruelty, but now I think it was fear. Fear that words made you vulnerable, fear that softness would undo everything he'd built. It took an 11-year-old boy with a pencil and a backbone to show him that strength isn't silence. It's honesty. It's accountability. It's saying, "I was wrong," and choosing to grow anyway. Micah, for his part, didn't gloat. He didn't even bring up the report card again. He just went on being his quiet, thoughtful self. But I saw the way he watched my father now, not with caution, but with curiosity, like he was seeing the man beneath the armor. One night, a week after that lunch, Micah and I were doing dishes together. He passed me a plate, then asked, "Did Grandpa really mean it when he said he was proud?" I didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I think he meant every word." Micah dried his hands and leaned against the counter. "You waited a long time to hear that." "I did," I said. "But it meant more coming now, after everything." He looked thoughtful for a moment, then said something I'll never forget. "I think some people don't know how to say what they feel until someone shows them how." He didn't mean it as profound, but it hit me like a tidal wave. He was right. We spend so much time waiting for the people we love to change, to finally see us, finally say the thing we've always needed to hear. But sometimes they can't, not because they don't care, but because no one ever taught them how. And sometimes it takes a child with the courage to speak truth in a room full of adults to break that cycle. This story isn't about revenge. It's not even about redemption. It's about recognition. My son gave his grandfather a second sheet of paper, not to humiliate him, but to invite him to grow, to change, to be better. And that's the most powerful thing we can ever offer someone we love. So if you're watching this and there's someone in your life who's never said the words you needed, maybe it's not too late. Maybe the lesson isn't to stay silent. Maybe the lesson is say the hard thing. Say it kindly. Say it truthfully. Say it for yourself, for your kids, for the people coming after you. Because healing doesn't always come from the person who caused the wound. Sometimes it comes from the child who's brave enough to name it. Thanks for listening to our story. If it moved you, made you think about your own family, or even reminded you of something you've been holding back, it means a lot that you stayed to the end. Stories like this aren't just about one family, they're about all of us, how we learn, how we grow, and how we break the silence that holds us back. If you felt something today, I'd love for you to like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below. Tell me about a time you found your voice or someone surprised you by finally hearing you. And if you want more stories like this, real, emotional, and honest, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. Until then, take care of your voice. Someone out there needs to hear it.